Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. We are right at 3 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Indiana Broadband Office's third and final webinar for our challenge process. We had such great attendance for the first two and request for more and an additional time, so we're really glad that you could all join us at this time. My name is Megan Miner, and I'm a consultant working with the Indiana Broadband Office on all things BEAD, including the initial proposal and state challenge process. And I'm happy to be walking you through this all today. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Cox for a quick introduction, and then we will jump right in.
Hi, I'm Steve Cox. I'm the Indiana Infrastructure and Broadband Administrator for the state. As Megan just mentioned, I want to welcome all of you to our third webinar. This has been really exciting, and the amount of folks that have participated has been really unbelievable and amazing. And we wanted to make sure that we provided an additional offering so that way we didn't miss anybody. And really glad you're here. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Megan.
Thanks so much, Steve. So on to the next slide. This is what our agenda is going to look like today. As you'll notice, we have a lot of content to go through in a pretty short time frame. So what I'll ask of you is if you have any questions as we go along, if you could put those in the chat, that would be extremely helpful. We'll have some natural pauses throughout the presentation where I'll ask Madison, my colleague that's working on this effort as well. She'll read me the questions, as well as some people will be answering questions in chat as they come in if they're easy to answer. So if you could just ask your questions that way at any point in time during the presentation, we will make sure that they all get answered either during the presentation or after. So this is where we're headed today. We're going to do an overview of the challenge process, talk about the timeline, as well as evidence collection and things you can start to do to prepare for the challenge process. We'll walk through a couple of different challenge types and what that will look like to submit. And then we'll talk about action items that you need to be thinking about leaving this meeting. So first and foremost, what is the challenge process? If you're on this webinar, you're likely already familiar somewhat with this process, but really we like to think of the challenge process as our one opportunity to gather the best data possible before we launch into subgrantee selection for the BEAD funds. So this is our way to crowdsource lots of different evidence, really get an understanding of what is going on at the local level, and make sure that we can allocate resources appropriately across the state to make sure that all unserved and underserved locations receive reliable quality broadband service. And the challenge process is going to enable all of our subgrantee selection. It's going to be the foundation that that is built upon. So we really, really want to use this one opportunity to make sure that we have the best data possible. So what exactly is being challenged in terms of underlying data? So the NTIA, the federal office that administers the BEAD program, requires that states begin with the FCC broadband map data. The Indiana Broadband Office will be using the release that happened in November of 2023 as our baseline data for the broadband map. That is the most recent comprehensive update to the map. So that is where our underlying data starts. Then the Indiana Broadband Office has been working on removing what are called state level enforceable commitments. So these are any locations that have already been awarded any kind of state or local funds for broadband service and deployment. So this would mean like Next Level Connections or the Indiana Connectivity Program. Because we can't duplicate funding for a single location, we deduplicate all of those locations, and that essentially becomes our base map for the BEAD challenge process. So as you start thinking about locations that may need to be challenged or what that data is going to be, that's how we came to the ultimate list of locations and what we believe their status is. So the challenge process has a couple of permissible challengers. Those three are nonprofit organizations, units of local government, and internet service providers. So the first two webinars that we did, they were each targeted at, one was for internet service providers, a little more customized to that. Another was for nonprofit organizations and units of local government, a little more customized to their needs. This presentation is going to be a little bit of a mashup of both of those, since I know we have attendees from all of those organization types on this call. So if you have any specific questions for your organization type that don't get answered, certainly just let us know. So these are the three types of organizations that are actual permissible challengers and will be able to actually submit challenges and participate in the process. However, this does not mean that there isn't a role for members of the public or other organizations in terms of collecting evidence, understanding what's going on a local level, and ultimately having all of that flow into the challenge process. It is likely that permissible challengers will work really closely with members of the public to gather evidence, determine where needs to be challenged, and that is totally appropriate. Permissible challengers are just a way to funnel up that information and make sure that we get all of the evidence in the right format to submit challenges. And then talking a little bit about the challenge process timeline. So this gives you an overview of where we are headed. I'm going to start with pre-registration and then skip back to CostQuest licensing. So pre-registration will open between now and the end of February. So this is going to be a process where permissible challengers can go ahead and register on our challenge portal. To get ready. They won't be able to submit challenges, but it makes it so they're already in the system and will be able to hit the ground running when the challenge process does actually start. We will be announcing a final date for when pre-registration begins very, very shortly. That's going to come out via all of our social media channels, email blasts, kind of all of the normal formats. So stay tuned for that really in the next couple of days as we finalize. The challenge phase will start on March 4th, and that will last until April 3rd. So there are 30 days for challengers to submit challenges within the portal. You can start collecting evidence now. That is a great idea to be prepared, but really those 30 days are the time frame to submit the challenges and make sure that the Indiana Broadband Office has the evidence that it needs. After the challenge phase, we'll move right into rebuttals. So that's going to be April 4th to May 3rd. That's another 30 days. This is when internet service providers will have a chance to submit any rebuttal evidence against any challenges that they may have to their service. So that is going to be a 30-day process. And then finally, we will move into final determinations. And so that's going to be where the Indiana Broadband Office and its final determination committee will review all of the locations that have received both a challenge and a rebuttal and ultimately make a final determination about whether that location should be eligible for BEAD funding. So that is the high-level timeline and where we are going with the entire challenge process. Now, jumping back to the beginning, even ahead of pre-registration, CostQuest licensing is something that we are thinking about right now. You've received the emails from Leela and the Indiana Broadband Office. I know there have been several, then you have probably heard CostQuest licensing mentioned. This is something that we are really encouraging people to seek out as soon as possible so that they are ready for when the challenge process begins if they choose to get a license. I know that CostQuest licensing can be a bit confusing, so I did want to run through exactly what that means. So in order to actually administer the BEAD program in the state, Indiana was required to enter into a licensing agreement with CostQuest Associates, and they are the organization that actually owns the location level data set that is used to compile the full FCC broadband map. And every single state had to enter into this licensing agreement to receive full data to be able to run their BEAD program. Because of some of the specifications of this particular licensing agreement, the Indiana Broadband Office isn't able to make this data fully available to permissible challengers without them having their own CostQuest licenses. So you can have access to certain aspects of the data, but we can't make that data available in full. So the way around this is that the NTIA also entered into an agreement with CostQuest, and they are offering free licenses to CostQuest for any permissible challenger that are available by request. So I want to talk through what are the situations that might be appropriate for someone to request a CostQuest license. So this is a very, very large data set. It can be difficult to work with. So it's having a CostQuest license is not necessary for submitting challenges, but it's going to be appropriate for certain types of organizations. And really, the two things that we're thinking about for CostQuest licenses are any organizations that are thinking about submitting a really large volume of challenges. A CostQuest license is really going to be helpful in being able to prepare those challenges, find location IDs, and be able to kind of collate all of that evidence. A cost quest license is also only going to be appropriate for organizations that have technical resources or know how to complete some data matching and use a complicated data set like that. I've worked with it. It is a little tough to work with. We will be able to provide some technical assistance, but just to know that is what cost quest looks like realistically. So it may or may not be right for your organization. There are two different types of cost quest licenses, one specifically for internet service providers, and then another for nonprofits and local government units. Those are your tier D licenses for internet service providers and tier E licenses for other organizations. You can find the link to request a cost quest license in this slide deck. It is also on the Indiana Broadband Office webpage. And if you do decide that your organization should get a cost quest license, we would encourage you to seek that out as soon as possible and make that request. That request portal is for every single state in the country. And we know that there are many states that are running their challenge process at the same time as Indiana. So we want to make sure that if you make a request, there's time for that to be processed and for you to have access to the data in time to actually use it to submit challenges. So that's what cost quest is. Those are a couple of questions that you can think about as you're deciding whether or not to request a cost quest license. Next, I want to move into challenge process registration. So the Indiana Broadband Office has partnered with ready.net to provide its challenge process portal and actually its subgrantee selection portal as well. So it'll be a singular portal that will work for the challenge process, and then internet service providers will use it as well for submitting project areas and applications during subgrantee selection. So all registration and all submission of challenges will go through this ready.net portal. And like I mentioned, there will be a pre-registration process. We will announce the date for that soon, though permissible challengers will be able to register throughout the entire challenge phase as well. And so that portal is actually going to be available on the connectingindiana.com. So it'll be another place to click from the existing speed test page that you may already be familiar with. In terms of registration, how it works is that a permissible challenger organization should register one time in the portal. Then we will review that registration and make sure that all of the requirements are met for confirming that it is an eligible permissible challenger, and then that organization will be confirmed. After that, multiple users can be added to the same organization. So you can have multiple email addresses getting notification, multiple people that can go in and submit challenges on behalf of a singular permissible challenger. So what we would ask of you as you start thinking about registering for the process is to only register your organization once, and then wait until that organization is approved and then start adding multiple users rather than having multiple people in your organization register the organization multiple times. Depending on the type of organization, there are some different requirements that will be needed during the registration process. So those are detailed here as well as in volume 1 of Indiana's initial proposal. In the challenge portal itself, there are several challenge types that an organization will be able to make. I'm going to run through these slides pretty quickly because I think that a slide deck is a tough way to review all of this information about the description of the challenge types as well as example evidence. However, if you go out to the Indiana Broadband Office's website, this is all detailed at great lengths in the initial proposal volume 1. It has all of the examples of what is adequate evidence as well as what rebuttal evidence that would be adequate would be. So I'm just going to hit some of the challenge types that based on our conversations with other states and the NTIA, we are expecting to see most frequently. So the first two of those would be first, the availability challenge. So this is going to be when a permissible challenger is saying that the broadband service that we have identified is not actually offered at that location. So evidence for this could range pretty significantly. It could be a screenshot of a provider website saying that they don't offer that service in that area, or it could be a letter or email saying that that individual requested service to their location, but they weren't able to get it. So you'll notice with several of these challenge types, there might be different types of evidence that you are submitting. So if you ever have any questions about what may qualify as sufficient evidence, we are certainly happy to help answer those. The next one that I want to talk about are speed challenges, especially because the level of evidence that is needed to substantiate a challenge is particularly high for speed challenges. So this challenge would occur when the actual speed of service at a location falls below the unserved and underserved thresholds. So to be able to substantiate this type of challenge, for a single location, there must be a set of 3 speed tests, and they must be taken on 3 separate days. And they must be taken within 60 days of the challenge being submitted, which right now we are well within that window. So you can start taking those speed tests, gathering those speed tests as evidence. And then they also must include a proof of tier that the subscriber is paying for. So this can typically be found on a subscriber's bill or on their online portal. A picture of that showing what they're paying for also needs to be included with this type of challenge. Other challenge types include latency challenges, data cap challenges, technology, and business service only. And then the last few that I want to talk about here that I think are particularly of interest for our internet service provider partners are enforceable commitment, not part of enforceable commitment, and planned service challenges. So we are using all of the data that we have available to deduplicate enforceable commitments, but if you find a location that the Indiana Broadband Office has not identified that is part of an enforceable commitment, that is certainly something that you can challenge and make sure that we have the best information. Another that will be particularly relevant is planned service. So if a provider already has a deployment planned before the end of June of this year, they can submit a challenge for planned service and show proof that construction contracts or something similar are available for that specific location to make it ineligible for the BEAD program. Then the last 2 challenge types are around community anchor institutions. So whether the location is a community anchor institution and should be included in Indiana's list, or that the location we have identified as a community anchor institution should not be. So those are all of the challenge types. Again, I would encourage you to go review. There's a full, really comprehensive table in volume 1, and we will also have some additional resources available shortly on the Indiana Broadband Office website, specifically around the challenge process and what makes an eligible challenge. All right, last thing that I want to cover before we start answering some questions are area and multi-dwelling unit challenges. So this is a module of the challenge process that the Indiana Broadband Office has opted into. And these challenge types lower the burden of proof, basically, so that if a certain number of locations within a single challenge type and provider are submitted, all locations within that area or multi-dwelling unit will be challenged. So I'd like to walk you through an example because I think that's can be a little bit confusing. So for example, on the area challenges, if 6 locations in a single census block group are challenged under the same challenge type and under the same provider, all locations within that census block group that have that same provider and technology type will also be challenged while not having to gather evidence for every single one of those locations. So just lowering the burden of proof that we need to be able to notice a pattern across that census block group. And then similarly for multi-dwelling units, this is going to be evidence for at least 3 units or 10% of the units within that same location under the same challenge type. That's going to flip all of the units in that location to being challenged. Okay, next we're going to talk about evidence collection tools and then jump into looking at some screenshots of the actual challenge submission process, but I will go ahead and pause for questions here.
Okay, we have a few. First, we have one that says, how are nonprofit organizations defined, 501c3 status or not?
Yeah, so this is a question. I think we will follow up on this. I think it is a little loose in terms of what is considered a nonprofit organization. It does not have to be specifically 501c3, but if you have a question about your organization, we'd be happy to handle that offline.
Next, will we need to have a CostQuest license before we're able to register on ready.net?
You will not have to have a CostQuest license, no. So you can actually go in and submit challenges without having a CostQuest license. It is not a requirement for accessing the portal or submitting challenges. However, if you decide to get a CostQuest license and you are submitting a really large number of challenges, having that underlying data may be helpful to you, so you don't have to go and add locations individually to your challenge, but you are not at all required to have a CostQuest license to participate in the challenge process.
Next, how does the public submit an issue to the challenger?
So the public actually cannot submit any type of challenge during this process. So members of the public that may have issues with their service or think that they need to, that their location needs to be examined will need to work with a local government unit or a nonprofit in their area to help them gather the appropriate evidence and then have that nonprofit or local government unit submit it on that individual's behalf. I'm also going to show a little later, we are working on an additional kind of website with ready.net where members of the public can submit some information. So that may be another route to do it. We'll talk through that, but members of the public cannot directly submit a challenge. They'll need to have conversations with a permissible challenger in their area.
Next, how will addresses awarded for Next Level Connections Round 4 be removed from the challenge process?
Absolutely. So we will not be able to remove those from the challenge process on the front end simply because they will not be awarded before we start running the challenge process. However, our subgrantee selection process is not going to start until after Next Level Connections Round 4 has been awarded. So once we have all of the results of the challenge process, we will deduplicate anything that was awarded in Next Level Connections Round 4 before we start subgrantee selection.
And I think we just have one more, and the question is, will there be a limit to the number of locations allowed per challenge?
Yes, so the limit is 500 locations per individual challenge. All
Okay.
right, any other questions at this time?
None that I've seen come in.
All right, well, continue to submit your questions via chat, and we will circle back to those again after the next section. Those are all really good questions. So jumping into evidence collection tools, obviously the challenge process is starting really shortly, and we want to make sure that you're equipped for being able to gather the right evidence and know where you need to challenge. So a couple of things that I wanted to go over as tools for understanding where might need to be challenged and also gathering evidence. The first of these is the FCC National Broadband Map. Many of you are likely familiar with this website, but this is not a BEAD specific website. This is, showing broadband and categorizations that are not 100% in alignment with BEAD. So I want to make sure to give you some guidance about how to use this website appropriately as you're thinking about locations that need to be challenged. So in the challenge process overall, if we already know that a location is unserved or underserved and our data reflects that, there is no challenge that needs to be made. We already know that they are eligible for the BEAD funds and that we will need to reach them through our deployment projects. What we're really worried about in the challenge process and where we want to see challenges submitted are any locations that our data says are served, but we actually know that that is incorrect and they are unserved or underserved. So that's what we're looking for in the challenges. If we already know it's unserved or underserved, that's not good, of course, because there's no, there's not high quality service there, but we know that we have to reach it. We really want to make sure that any locations that are served that we've identified as served but are not really, that's what we're trying to identify in the challenge process. So one tool as you're starting to think about collecting evidence and identifying where challenges may need to be submitted, this is it. So on this website, it's broadbandmap.fcc.gov. This is what the homepage looks like, and you can immediately search a single address. So I'm going to have several addresses throughout this presentation. They're just random choices from across the state. So there's nothing particularly relevant about which addresses were selected. So when you search an address, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to show you a map. Across the top here in the gray bar, it's going to show you what filters are on. And you can see that right now it automatically defaults to any technology. It shows you what type of service it is, and it shows you what speed tier it's using to determine served or not served. Then on the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to see that it shows broadband availability by every single provider that has reported service at that location, the technology that they're reporting, as well as the speed. However, like I mentioned, this is not BEAD specific, so there is some filtering that you'll need to do to get an accurate answer about what our underlying data says for a specific address. So what you're going to do is click on that service filters button that's in that gray bar above the map. When you do that, it's going to pop up this collecting evidence, or this broadband settings pop up, and you're going to need to make a couple of different changes to align with the BEAD program. So it defaults to any technology type, but not all technology types are considered for BEAD. So to make this accurate to BEAD program requirements, you will need to select all wired and licensed fixed wireless. So for example, satellite is not eligible for this program. And so if a location is served, but only served because satellite serves that location, we actually treat that as an unserved or underserved location. So you'll need to toggle to all wired and licensed fixed wireless. And then next, you'll need to choose your speed depending on what exactly you want to see. If you want to identify any unserved or underserved addresses, you'll need to select 100/20. And if you just want to identify unserved addresses, you'll need to select 25/3. And when you do that, you will notice that some things have changed on the screen. So again, those filters across the top, you'll see it looks a little different. Now you'll see it says all wired and licensed fixed wireless, and we've changed our speed to 100/20. And now you can see that the status for this particular location has changed from served to not served. That's because as you look at the technology types that are reported for this particular location, none of those are actually eligible at those speeds for BEAD program being considered served. So that's what you're going to want to do as you're looking up specific addresses. Make sure you use those filters appropriately. That's going to give you the best answer about whether how we currently label a location. The next tool that I want to cover for collecting evidence, which you all are likely familiar with as well, is the connectingindiana.com speed test. Again, you can go ahead and start taking these speed tests, saving all of the results. They are going to be eligible at this point for the challenge process. And by using this particular speed test, we can guarantee that in the screenshot or the results that you will have all of the information that is needed to substantiate a challenge. So please push members of the public, anyone you interact with specifically, to use this tool for collecting speed tests and ultimately aggregating speed challenges. I will also say it will be particularly helpful if, so this is the screen that you receive once you are done taking a speed test. It gives you all of the information, address, IP address, the date and time, as well as all of your results for download and upload speeds, as well as latency. You can take a screenshot of this, and that is perfectly fine. But we would also really encourage you to do the download test results. That is going to download a PDF directly to the individual's computer. And that's going to be really the best way to keep track of this evidence, or if you need technical assistance in kind of aggregating and putting your evidence in the right format, it's going to be most helpful if you have this in the PDF. So would just encourage, as you're talking about the speed test, to download those test results via PDF. The last evidence collection tool that I want to talk about is that public-facing portal that I was just mentioning that we are working on with ready.net. This is going to be accessible, again, to anyone from the public, and it's going to allow them to submit a comment about an address. So this is not a challenge. This is not members of the public submitting a challenge, but it's enabling them to submit some information to maybe help a permissible challenger eventually substantiate a challenge. So what this will look like is that a member from the public would come in, they would select the comment type that they would like to leave. Most likely that's going to be availability or speed. Then they're going to fill in details like their name, their email address, what specific provider they would like to comment on, the technology type, and then they're going to provide some information for why they are putting in that comment. And then finally, they'll be able to upload any kind of evidence or documentation for their comment. This could be speed test results, for example, or screenshots of a provider website. Going to be really, really highly dependent on what type of comment a member of the public is providing. And so after this information is submitted by members of the public, based on the address that is given by the member of the public when they submit this, any registered local governments or nonprofits in that jurisdiction will be able to review these comments within their challenge portal. So this gives them some information to be able to reach out to that individual and maybe know that there's a problem. Or if that individual has gone ahead and gathered a lot of evidence already, they may be able to directly confirm and submit this evidence as a challenge in the portal. So again, this is not directly submitting a challenge. This is just providing additional information to permissible challengers to maybe be able to submit a challenge eventually with the information submitted in the comment. All right. The next thing we're going to jump into is looking at the actual screenshots of the portal and walking through how to submit a challenge. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and see if we have any additional questions before I jump into that.
Just one. The question is, can you clarify the 500 location limit? Is that only 500 challenge locations per challenger, or is it 500 locations per session on the portal?
Okay, so it is neither of those. It is per specific challenge. So you'll see when we walk through some of the screenshots, first you select a challenge type. There are certain ways that you have to aggregate challenges to be able to submit them. So that is for individual challenges. So I might make one, let's say, planned service challenge. And with that individual planned service challenge, with those pieces of evidence, I can only submit 500 locations. But then I could immediately, after those are submitted, go and submit another challenge with an additional 500 locations if I would need to. So there is not a limit on specific challengers in the portal or per session. It is per challenge type.
And there's actually
at one single time.
Thank you, Megan. Are we going, as we are going through these processes to help better serve these underserved or not served? I'm sorry, my computer jumped. Let me restart. As we are going through these processes to help better serve these underserved or not served areas through the BEAD program, when would we see the deployment of the projects from the ISP?
Yep, so that's going to be heavily dependent. We are currently planning for our sub-grantee selection process to begin after the challenge process sometime this summer. Indiana is currently planning to have 3 rounds of sub-grantee selection in quick succession with each other, and then deployments would start. So overall, BEAD has a 4-year timeline in terms of deployment from the time that an award is given to when service actually has to be deployed to those locations. So it could be, depending on the award type and what that looks like, it will be anywhere in that 4-year time period.
And a final one snuck in. Would you please reiterate what CostQuest data set BEAD will be based on? Is it the November 2023 set?
Yes, it is the November 2023 set.
I think that's it for now.
All right. Okay, we are going to jump into looking at the challenge submission process and some examples of what the portal looks like. So again, continue putting those questions in the chat if you have them. So the first one that we're going to go through is a speed challenge. We like to show this one because it is certainly the most complicated just because of the level of evidence that needs to be provided. So we like to walk you through what the hardest one is going to look like to give you a sense of the level of effort needed for a challenge. So when you first log into the challenge portal, this is what it looks like. You're going to see a dashboard, and it'll give you some ideas about the number of challenges that you have submitted, any that need revision, and any that you have withdrawn. So you'll be able to see the status of any challenges submitted as you go. There are two main things in the left-hand menu. The first is the dashboard, which we're looking at right now, and then the second is the challenge map. And so if you click to the challenge map, once you are a registered permissible challenger and we open the challenge process, you'll be able to have lots of filtering ability on this particular map. You can look at different types of locations in terms of whether it's residential and business, or solely business. You can look only at unserved locations if you like. You can search by community anchor institutions. It gives you a lot of filter capability to be able to prepare your challenges. So this is something that is a resource that is always available for permissible challengers. Then again, going back to the dashboard, you can also see here as challenges come in, the Indiana Broadband Office will be reviewing these challenges, not to make final determinations, but just to make sure that appropriate evidence is there to actually substantiate that type of challenge. So you'll be able to see, as the IBO reviews any challenges that you have submitted, whether any of those need revision or whether they have been processed and approved as legitimate challenges. So when we go to submit a challenge, we're going to click that add challenge button. That is on basically every screen, so it will always be really, really accessible. So once you click that, this is the screen that it will start to show you, and you can see across the top here, this is the general flow for every type of challenge that you would submit. You'll do the challenge category, then the specific challenge type. You'll fill in some details specific to that challenge type. You'll select the locations, you'll upload evidence and documentation, and then you will complete an attestation. So we start with the challenge category. For this one specifically, we are going to do speed challenges, which are provider service level challenges. So this is going to cover anything like availability, speed, latency, data cap. That's all going to be provider service level. So you'll click that. And then you will move to the next screen. You'll see we've moved to challenge type, and you will select a speed challenge, particularly here. Once you do that, the portal will ask you whether you are doing a multi-dwelling unit challenge. This is just to know for calculating if you're looking at multiple units within a single location. We're not going to walk through that in this particular webinar, but if you plan on submitting multi-dwelling unit challenges, we'd be happy to have a separate conversation and walk you through what that process looks like. But for the sake of today, we're going to assume that we're clicking no on this multi-dwelling unit challenge. So next, we'll get to challenge details. And so what you will need to do is select the provider and technology type first that you are challenging with these speed challenges. So as you're thinking about gathering evidence and starting to prepare these challenges, remember that these challenges need to be organized by provider and technology type as you're inputting them into the system. Another thing that's really nice throughout this process is that this map is always accessible to use and filter. So even on this same page, you can click this caret and these same filters will pop out. So let's say you are maybe submitting a challenge for a singular location, but now you don't exactly remember the provider or technology type. That is something that you could search for in this platform directly. So again, for example, I'm just going to choose a random address, and you can see that this is what's showing up in terms of the providers and what is available there. So we can fill in that provider information and that technology type information, and it's already categorized as underserved, but we really think based on speed tests that it should be unserved instead. So that's what we're challenging. So that is how the flow will go. On the next slide, when you select locations, there are multiple ways that you can select locations to input into a challenge. The first of these is that there is a search bar. So if you're doing a lower number of challenges in a single challenge type, you can actually just search for individual addresses and then it will pop up and you can click and add them to the challenge. If you are selecting locations that are all in one single area, there's also the option to do like a click and drag to create a polygon. And all locations that you have multi-selected would also be included in that challenge. You also have the option to upload a list of locations for the challenge. However, this is only an option if you have a CostQuest license. To be able to upload a list of locations, you will need to identify the FCC location IDs of those addresses, and you will only have that data available to you through a CostQuest license. However, if you have a CostQuest license and you are planning on doing a really large challenge with maybe 100 or more locations, what you will do is simply put those location IDs in a CSV, upload it here, and that will populate your list of locations that you are challenging. So once you have selected locations, so in this example, I've just manually added 2 locations to the challenge. You can see those appear here. What you're seeing on the top, that top number is the FCC location ID, and then the address, of course, is below that. If you get to this page and you decide, oh, I need to stop, I need to come back to this, what you can do is download this location spreadsheet here, and it will just provide a CSV file of location IDs so that you could go through this flow again. And instead of having to manually add locations, you could upload that CSV file with those pre-filled location IDs and be able to move through this more quickly. So after you have confirmed all of the locations that you will challenge, this is where it's going to differ by specific challenge type. And again, speed challenges just have the highest level of evidentiary requirements, which is why this one is so particularly complex. So walking through this, you will get to a screen and it will say download speed test evidence. And what that's going to do is download a CSV file that is pre-filled with location IDs, as well as all of the fields that need to be filled out to be able to substantiate this particular challenge. Everything on the left-hand side of the screen, these are going to be all of your instructions for filling out the CSV file. And so essentially the process will be, you will get to this page after you have selected your locations, you will download the CSV file, you will fill out the information in the CSV file and come back and re-upload it, as well as uploading all of the evidence files that need to accompany this. This would be PDFs of the speed test, screenshots of the tier of service that the consumer is paying for, that kind of thing. So this is what the CSV looks like. You will have different CSVs, of course, for different challenge types. Some are simpler than others, just based on the evidence that is required. But this is what the speed test CSV will look like. These are all fields for the most part that you will be able to find just by looking at the evidence that is available for that location. So what you can see is that there will be 3 rows for each individual location ID, 1 for each of those speed tests that is required, and then you will fill out all of the data and re-upload. So when you've filled out that CSV, again, coming back to this page, you would re-up the file as well as uploading all of the evidence files that accompany it. And then finally, you will have to complete an attestation that all of this information is true to the best of your knowledge. And then ultimately your challenge will be submitted. And then we will start the review process internally at the IBO to make sure that all of the evidence is in place. So that is what a speed challenge would look like as you are flowing through. I will also say at the end of this presentation, we're going to talk about some technical assistance that the Indiana Broadband Office has available for all permissible challengers just to help guide you through this process. We know that there's a really high level of evidence for many of these, and it might be difficult to fill out all of this information. So we're happy to help in the ways that we can to help ease the burden. I also wanted to flow through quickly because I know we have several internet service providers on the call as well, what a planned service challenge looks like, since we know from our conversations with other states that this is also a likely one. So again, you would go to that add challenge button. Again, it's going to flow you through a really similar experience here, the challenge category, type, details, locations, and evidence. So for this one in particular, you would choose planned or existing service on this page, and then you would have to, on challenge type, choose between planned service or existing service. Then you will have to attest to the level of service and when it is being deployed for the locations that you are submitting. So you would complete an attestation page. Then you would select the locations that are included in the planned service challenge. So again, this is a location where you could search for individual addresses if that is the preferred route. You could click and drag a polygon, or you could also upload that list of location IDs to add to your planned service challenge. So again, just giving an example here, we've added 3 individual addresses for this planned service challenge. And again, you can see all of that information as you're flowing through and filtering on the map. Also notice, again, if you do not have the location IDs, this is another place where you can download that if you need to come back later and make it a little easier on yourself to identify those locations. And then for planned service, again, this is a little different because there is likely to be a singular construction contract or other evidence for all of these locations. There is no CSV for this file type. However, you will have to upload any documentation that substantiates this planned service challenge here. So you will want to organize those by the evidence that you have for individual locations as you prepare your planned service challenges. And then finally, again, you would complete that attestation, verifying the validity of all of the data that has been submitted. And then you would press submit challenge and be able to move forward to submitting other challenges if you need to. All right, I'm going to pause here again for any questions that we have about the portal or those screenshots, anything.
Yes. So there was a question that says, for the enforceable commitment challenge, if a provider, for example, has an RDOF award to provide broadband service using a technology not considered reliable, such as unlicensed fixed wireless, will these locations still be eligible for BEAD overbuild, considering they are utilizing technologies not considered reliable by the NTIA?
So I may also ask Steve to weigh in on this, but from my knowledge, if they have been awarded funds for a technology type that is not eligible for BEAD, they would still be eligible for BEAD funds because they do not have reliable broadband service. Unlicensed fixed wireless is not considered reliable broadband service under the BEAD program specifically. So they would not show up on this map as an enforceable commitment.
Next.
I would agree with what you're putting out there, Megan.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Next, if I apply as a county entity for a license and end up not challenging, does it cause any problems?
You are perfectly welcome to do that. You can also register in the challenge portal if you want to click around and look at the data, but you are not in any way obligated to submit a challenge.
Next, what are the consequences of a provider submitting a planned service record and not completing the project by June 30?
Yep. So I think I will need to get back to you specifically on what that looks like. But if they did not live up to that commitment, then that location would then become eligible for BEAD funds at the very least.
And finally, sorry if I missed it, and if you said it earlier, what is a planned service challenge? Is this to challenge addresses that are supposedly in plans to be serviced by an ISP, but actually are not?
So planned service would be if an internet service provider has deployment plans before the end of June of this year and already has all of the permits and construction contracts in place to be able to show that they plan to deploy to that location. So that is what a planned service challenge is that it is in a deployment plan and the level of evidence is showing that all of these things are already in place to make that happen before the end of June of 2024.
Okay, I think we're good to move on.
All right, amazing. Well, then just a couple of items as we're looking ahead. Again, want to reiterate these dates for the challenge process. So March 4th is when our challenge phase is going to kick off. That will be a 30-day time period where permissible challengers can submit challenges. For our ISPs on the call, we will then very quickly move into the rebuttal phase, which will be 30 days. Essentially, how this will work is as challenges are confirmed to have sufficient evidence to actually substantiate a challenge, internet service providers will be notified within the ready.net platform that there is a challenge on a location against that provider. You can begin to review that information as soon as we are able to verify it, but you will not actually be able to submit rebuttal evidence until April 4th when the rebuttal phase starts. That will last for 30 days. So all rebuttals will need to be submitted by May 3rd, and then the Indiana Broadband Office will move into final determinations. I also want to reiterate on the rebuttal phase that the process for submitting rebuttal evidence is basically identical to submitting a challenge in the first place. So it's going to be a really similar flow. You'll be familiar with that to be able to submit any rebuttal evidence that is needed. All right. Next, I want to leave you as well with a list of resources. So the Indiana Broadband Office recognizes that this is certainly a complicated process and that everyone has, existing day jobs that they do on top of all of this great work for their communities. So we want to make sure that we're providing assistance and resources where we can to make sure that we get the best challenges possible and can improve our data. So on the Indiana Broadband Office website, that's going to be the primary source for any documentation or tutorials you need for the challenge process. So all 3 webinars that we've hosted are going to be made available for review. I will tell you, it's very similar content, but the questions have differed a little bit. So all of those, as well as the slides, will be available for review. We are also working on recording demos and tutorials on how to submit every single challenge type. So those will also be available for permissible challengers. If you have any questions about how to do that, there will be video tutorials walking you through each individual challenge type. We will also have challenge process checklists of the type of evidence and the process for submitting, if you'd prefer that in a written form. We're also going to be providing all of the CSV templates for challenges so that you can start to fill those in if you like, or understand how you will need to aggregate those. Those are going to be on the Indiana Broadband Office website here in the next week, as well as that public-facing portal that we discussed where constituents can actually submit comment for permissible challengers to be able to review and help them get the right evidence. The Indiana Broadband Office is also going to be offering technical assistance where it can. So you'll see on the next page, we are going to be hosting some office hours over the next 2 weeks. So these are going to be much more informal than the webinars that we've been hosting. These will just be time blocks on Zoom where, let's say you have a question come up or you want to walk through something really specific on the portal. You can feel free to hop on to those office hours at any point in time, ask questions, get clarification, and that is open to anyone. The IBO will also be offering technical assistance once the challenge phase commences. So specifically, this is going to be for anyone that needs technical assistance actually walking through the submission process or aggregating the CSV files. So the Broadband Office will not be able to help with any kind of evidence collection, but in terms of getting evidence in the right format to submit, that is a place where we can help you walk through in real-time guidance for submitting those challenges, as well as aggregating those CSV files. So we're going to be able to offer that via email and phone as well. If we know that you need this, this is something that is open to any of our permissible challengers. Just reach out to the Indiana Broadband Office if you think that is something that could help you in this process. And then finally, I want to leave you with our office hours. So these are the dates and times. It is going to be Tuesday and Thursday of the next 2 weeks. We'll be sending out the Zoom links after this webinar for all of these office hours. Again, feel free to drop in at any time and ask questions about the challenge process if you have them. And at the bottom of the slide as well, I have the email address for the Indiana Broadband Office. This is your go-to email address for any kind of questions. If you think you need technical assistance, anything at all around the challenge process, you can always feel free to reach out to ibochallenge@iot.in.gov. And with that, I will pause one more time for any additional questions that have come in, if we have any, Madison.
Just one. What if the ISP is not listed on the map? How will they be notified?
So if they've not registered within the portal, so we will have ways that will be more of a manual process where we would need to talk to that individual provider and whether they plan to participate in the challenge process. But we would say if you are a provider and you want to be involved in the challenge process, you will need to register on the Connecting Indiana portal. That will be your only option in terms of reviewing challenges and providing rebuttal evidence. All right. And if that is the last question, I will just say thank you all so much for hopping on this webinar. We really appreciate your interest and your participation. We're excited about the challenge process. We think it's a good opportunity to update our data and really make sure that we're using the BEAD funds where they need to be used the most. So thank you. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Have a good rest of your day.